What if a single, silent act from the Pope could speak louder than any decree, signaling a profound shift in the very soul of the Church? Today, at St. Peter's Basilica, something truly remarkable happened. A moment so subtle, yet so potent, it sent ripples of hope through Catholics worldwide. Without making a single announcement, Pope Leo XIV reintroduced a liturgical gesture that had quietly disappeared nearly a decade ago, removed during the pontificate of Pope Francis in 2015. There was no statement, no formal explanation, just a simple act during the Mass. But for those intimately familiar with the deep traditions of the Church, it spoke volumes, a profound declaration without a single uttered word. Now, Catholics around the world are asking, was this just a one-time moment, a fleeting glimpse of the past, or the beginning of something far, far greater? It's been over 10 years since this gesture was last seen, a beloved tradition seemingly relegated to history. And today, at the very heart of the Vatican, it returned. Pope Leo XIV made a choice, subtle yet unmistakable, that signaled a clear departure from the liturgical style of his predecessor. It wasn't confrontational, it wasn't political in any overt sense. It was deeply symbolic, a reclamation of sacred practice. There were no speeches or documents to explain it, but for many of the faithful, especially those who have been watching closely, no explanation was needed. They understood the message, and they had been waiting for it, patiently, for years. To truly grasp the importance of what just happened, we need to go back to 2015. That was the year Pope Francis introduced a significant change to one of the oldest and most revered traditions of the papal liturgy. He removed from the Pope the direct role of placing the pallium, that sacred woolen band symbolizing unity and authority, on newly appointed metropolitan archbishops. Instead, that sacred act was delegated to papal representatives, the nuncios, who would carry out the ceremony within each archbishop's local diocese. The intention, according to Pope Francis, was to emphasize what he called pastoral decentralization. It was meant to strengthen the bond between the archbishop and the local faithful, focusing more on the local church and less on the immediate, visible authority of Rome. But not everyone welcomed this change. While the explanation highlighted pastoral closeness, many viewed it as a symbolic retreat from Rome's spiritual centrality. To them, it seemed like a subtle weakening of the visible unity between local bishops and the successor of Peter, a thread quietly cut. This wasn't merely a shift in protocol. It was seen by many as a nuanced theological statement, diminishing the unique role of the Pope as the universal shepherd, the one to whom all particular churches are ultimately bound. The gesture of the Pope, personally imposing the pallium, had always underscored a direct, personal link, a spiritual bond that transcended mere administrative delegation. Its absence left a void, a subtle chill for those who cherished the profound symbolism of Rome's visible, paternal connection to every corner of the Catholic world. Today, on the great solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, something quietly historic took place inside St. Peter's Basilica. Pope Leo XIV, with his own hands, once again placed the pallium upon the shoulders of the new metropolitan archbishops. This gesture, rich in meaning, deeply rooted in tradition, and long associated with the very heart of the papacy, was fully restored. The pallium is far more than a decorative garment. It is a sacred symbol, a sign of spiritual authority, ecclesial unity, and the shared identity of bishops within the universal church. For centuries, this woolen band has been placed on new metropolitans by the Pope himself, and always on this very feast, within the basilica dedicated to the apostles. To receive the pallium directly from the hands of the successor of Peter was never just a ritual. It was a visible expression of communion, a tangible seal of unity between Rome and the bishops who shepherd their flocks across the world. It connected the center of the church to her farthest peripheries in a gesture that was both humble and profoundly powerful. Woven from pure white wool, marked by 6 black crosses and worn gently around the shoulders like a light yoke. The pallium carries deep symbolism. It represents the calling of the shepherd to guide, to support, and when necessary to lay down his life for the good of the flock, much like Christ, the Good Shepherd. It's no accident that the pallium is made from the wool of 2 lambs that are specially blessed each year on the feast of Saint Agnes. After the blessing, their wool is kept safe until the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, when it is woven into the pallia and then symbolically presented to the Pope. Every detail in this ancient rite speaks of deep roots, of sacrifice, and of profound unity in the Church. It's a garment that whispers centuries of prayer, of martyrdom, and of the unbroken chain of apostolic succession. But in 2015, that visible thread of connection was quietly cut. Not by changing doctrine, but by subtly altering the very sign itself. From that year forward, metropolitans no longer traveled to Rome to receive the pallium from the hands of the Pope. Instead, they were given the sacred vestment by a papal representative in ceremonies held within their own dioceses. The reform, introduced under Pope Francis, was framed in terms of synodality and inculturation, principles aimed at giving more space to local expressions of faith. Yet for many Catholics, including numerous priests and bishops, something vital had been lost in the process. Yes, the bishop still received the pallium, but he no longer received it from the Pope. The liturgy remained, but it no longer unfolded beneath the majestic dome of St. Peter's, with the successor of Peter himself presiding. The gesture survived, but its source felt distant, even diminished. It was akin to removing the personal touch from a deeply significant family ritual, replacing the embrace of a parent with a delegated handshake. For many, it felt like a theological downgrading, a subtle dilution of the Pope's unique Petrine ministry. By restoring the original tradition today, Pope Leo XIV has done more than reintroduce a ceremonial act. He has reconnected a thread that once visibly tied each metropolitan to the heart of the Church. He has brought to light a theology, a way of seeing, that affirms the Roman pontiff not merely as a symbolic figure, not merely as the first among equals, but as a spiritual father who sends, who entrusts, who commissions. This act, while outwardly simple, speaks volumes about a particular vision of the papacy and its relationship to the wider Church. It signals a renewed emphasis on the universal fatherhood of the Pope, a visible reaffirmation of his direct, personal connection to the shepherds of the world. It's a gesture of profound spiritual gravity, reclaiming a powerful visual symbol of unity under Peter's successor. This isn't the first time Pope Leo XIV has extended a hand toward tradition. From the earliest days of his pontificate, there have been subtle but meaningful signs, small gestures that have not gone unnoticed by the faithful. The more reserved use of papal vestments, moving away from the simpler styles sometimes favored by his predecessor, has been noted by liturgical connoisseurs. The measured tone in his public addresses and his choice of private meetings with communities devoted to the ancient liturgy, communities that have often felt marginalized, have all pointed to a subtle but undeniable openness. These weren't grand pronouncements, but rather a quiet collection of indicators, like a compass needle subtly shifting north. His decision to receive a delegation of Benedictine monks dedicated to the traditional Latin Mass, and to engage in respectful dialogue, was a powerful, symbolic moment for many. And now, his decision to restore the imposition of the pallium within the Roman liturgy seems to fit within this same pattern. It is not a declaration of rupture, but a gesture of reconciliation, a mending of frayed threads rather than the drawing of new divisive lines. In this approach, Pope Leo appears to be practicing what could be called a silent restoration, one that doesn't loudly announce itself, but gently begins to repair what has been frayed, to reweave what has come undone, bit by delicate bit. This strategy, characterized by action over rhetoric, may prove to be far more impactful in the long run than any sweeping legislative changes. as it seeks to touch the liturgical and spiritual heart of the Church rather than merely its administrative structures. Still, not everything is easy to interpret. Alongside these hopeful signals, there are also signs of contradiction, details that have stirred unease among the more attentive and observant members of the Church. In recent months, several episcopal appointments have raised eyebrows. Some bishops, known for their alignment with more progressive theological and pastoral agendas, have been elevated to high-ranking positions. These choices, though perhaps strategic, aiming for broader representation or a particular form of pastoral outreach, have not yet been matched by similar appointments of bishops with a more traditional or conservative orientation. This asymmetry in appointments leaves many with a sense of lingering imbalance. And so, the question lingers. What direction is this papacy truly taking? Is it a genuine embrace of all expressions of Catholic life, or a more nuanced balancing act, carefully managing perceived tensions? At the heart of the Vatican, a quiet tension remains. Even some statements made by prelates closely associated with Pope Leo, though never outright dismissive of traditional forms, have often been vague enough to keep uncertainty alive. These mixed signals have left many with the impression that differing, even conflicting visions for the Church still coexist and perhaps even contend within the Curia. In this atmosphere of ambiguity, tradition appears to be tolerated, perhaps even subtly encouraged through certain gestures, but not yet fully embraced as a central, guiding principle for the entire Church. The gestures of Pope Leo seem genuine, even heartfelt, but at times they feel isolated, almost like singular acts of personal conviction rather than part of a fully articulated, comprehensive plan. A clear, overarching direction has not yet been drawn. There is no firm indication that he intends to undo the restrictions placed under Pope Francis, particularly those issued in Traditionis Custodes, which continue to deeply impact communities dedicated to the traditional Latin Mass. The official line, for now, remains complex and sometimes contradictory. For many believers, this uncertainty is not just political, it is deeply personal. In recent years, countless Catholics who found profound spiritual nourishment in the traditional forms of the faith have felt pushed aside, not formally condemned, but subtly marginalized. They've been called rigid, backward, even divisive, simply for clinging to the practices and expressions of faith that have nurtured saints for centuries. They've been treated as if they were stubbornly clinging to the past, watched with suspicion, not because of rebellion, but because of a deep, abiding love for what the Church has preserved for generations. These are not fringe radicals or sectarian groups. They are often families, young couples with many children, seminarians earnestly seeking holiness, dedicated priests, and fervent religious. They have not caused division or stirred rebellion. They have not broken communion, not even when faced with significant pressure. But they have carried a quiet, profound suffering, and they have prayed, ceaselessly, for recognition, for understanding, for a simple pastoral welcome. For many, hope had truly faded after the suppression of the Latin Mass in numerous dioceses, after the imposition of restrictions that limited access to sacraments in beloved rites, and after the silent penalties some endured for their fidelity. It seemed that Rome had, perhaps unwittingly, turned its back on them. Some remained patient, faithful in the shadows, enduring hardship for the sake of their spiritual heritage. Others withdrew quietly, heartbroken, choosing private prayer over public lament. Still others, with sorrow in their hearts, looked away, unsure if they would ever be welcomed again into the broader embrace of the Church they loved. And yet today, something changed. With a single ancient gesture, Pope Leo XIV spoke to them without saying a word. He offered no declarations, no sweeping statements, no condemnations or reforms. But his action, rooted in tradition, carried out with simplicity, communicated something deeper than any speech. In the Church, actions like this carry a meaning words cannot hold, resonating within the collective memory of the faithful. And for those who have long waited in silence, often feeling forgotten, it may be the first profound sign that they have not been forgotten after all. He didn't make a proclamation, he didn't announce a revolution, but he did something quietly powerful. He reclaimed a rite, a gesture, a piece of living tradition that had been intentionally set aside. In doing so, Pope Leo restored something essential, not just to the liturgy, but to Rome itself. He reminded the faithful that not all has been lost, that ancient threads, though frayed, can be rewoven. It was a sign, not a sweeping reform, not a promise of future change, but a sign nonetheless. One that speaks directly to those who have carried in their hearts, often in silence, the treasures the Church has passed down through the centuries. It was a gesture that says, "You are not forgotten. Your devotion to these sacred forms is seen. It is acknowledged." A sign like this does not erase the past. It doesn't solve every contradiction. It doesn't undo all the challenges facing traditional communities or resolve the complex theological debates that continue to simmer. But it can rekindle hope. It can remind us that the center of the Church still has the capacity to reach out to its peripheries, not to erase them, not to correct them, but to embrace them in their legitimate diversity. We are not called to judge hearts or to predict the intricate workings of curial politics, but we are called to notice the signs, to discern the subtle movements of grace. And today, on the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, a powerful sign appeared. One rooted in reverence, one drawn from tradition, one that affirms continuity. A gesture returned. A form was revived. A silence was broken. Perhaps it is only a moment. Perhaps it will stand alone as an isolated act, a single, beautiful glimmer in a complex papacy. But even a single moment, even a quiet sign, can be enough to remind us of a deeper truth. That the Church is not ultimately governed by human strategy or fleeting trends, but sustained by divine providence. We, the faithful, are not asked to predict the future or to unravel every political nuance. We are asked to be faithful in the present, to remain steady in prayer, to stand firm in hope, to endure with patience, trusting not in human power or cunning, but in God's grace alone. Not everything is clear, not everything is resolved, but something is moving. And for those who watch with open eyes and ready hearts, even a small gesture can be enough, because when received with love and faith, a sign, no matter how subtle, can become a spark, igniting new courage and resolve. Tradition is not about longing for the past. It is not mere nostalgia. It is living memory, a sacred thread that connects us to those who came before and to the truth that endures beyond time. It is the wisdom of the ages, distilled and passed down, providing a firm foundation for navigating the uncertainties of the present. And every time that memory is brought back into the light, even for just a moment, it becomes something worth witnessing, something that nourishes the soul. Because when someone dares to return a forgotten gesture to the Church, however briefly, it reminds us that what is holy never truly disappears. It waits patiently, profoundly, in the depths of the Church's liturgical memory until someone opens the door again, allowing its light to shine forth once more. Tradition is not nostalgia. It is the living breath of the Church, carried from generation to generation, not because it is old, but because it is true. It binds us not to the past, but to the eternal, to the unchanging God. When a tradition is broken, when a sacred form is set aside, something is lost, not only in outward expression, but sometimes, tragically, in the very soul of understanding. And when, even for a moment, that tradition is brought back to life, the heart of the Church stirs, as if recalling a beloved melody long forgotten. For those who have waited in silence, who have carried the beauty of these ancient signs in their hearts, that one moment is everything. It is a reminder that what is holy is never truly gone. It only waits to be remembered, to be cherished, to be lived again. Today, in the quiet return of a forgotten gesture, Pope Leo XIV did not simply perform a rite. He reopened a door that for many had seemed permanently closed. He didn't speak. He didn't issue a decree. And yet he said so much through his action. For those who have endured the slow marginalization of tradition, who have watched the sacred disappear behind layers of pastoral pragmatism, this moment was not about politics. It was not about power struggles or ideological victories. It was about being seen, being acknowledged, being quietly welcomed back into a church that had seemed, for a time, to no longer know what to do with them. These are the faithful who never left the church but often felt left behind by it, not because they resisted unity, but because they clung to what had always unified the saints, the reverence, the silence, the sacred gestures that spoke to the deepest mystery of God. These Catholics, young and old, never asked for privilege. They asked only for permission to love what the church had loved, to participate in the forms of worship that deeply nourished their souls. And for years, many of them felt invisible, their concerns dismissed, their spiritual needs often overlooked. Some continued on in hope, others withdrew quietly, choosing not to protest but to suffer in silence. A few, overwhelmed by sorrow, drifted away, not in anger but in heartbreak, because they believed that if they loved the church deeply enough, she would one day remember them. And in this quiet gesture, perhaps she has begun to. But this is not the end of a story. It may only be the first page of a new chapter. The gesture of Pope Leo XIV is not a reversal of policy. It is not a bold declaration of widespread reform or an immediate dismantling of previous restrictions. It is a sign. And signs, by their nature, invite us to watch closely, to listen carefully, to wait, not passively but prayerfully with hopeful discernment. Because the true renewal of the Church will not come through noise. It will not come through division or heated debate. It will come through fidelity, through the quiet courage of those who continue to kneel, continue to pray, continue to believe, even when they are misunderstood, even when the path is unclear. The question now is not what Pope Leo will do next. The question is what we, the faithful, will do. Will we demand immediate, sweeping changes from above, or will we strive to live the change from within, cultivating holiness in our own lives? The Church does not belong to factions or political parties. She does not survive through trends or passing ideologies. She endures because of saints, saints who are not always popular, saints who often walked in darkness, saints who loved the Church, even when she seemed silent or flawed, saints who held on to tradition not as a weapon, but as a light, a guide in confusing times. This is the calling now, not to fight, but to be faithful, not to complain, but to remain steadfast, not to argue, but to adore. And in doing so, we become part of the restoration, not by force, but by fidelity, not by resistance, but by reverence. What the Church needs now is not a revolution of structure, but a revival of the sacred, a revival that begins in the heart, that moves in silence, and that finds its way into the liturgy, the family, the seminary, and the individual soul. Because sacredness cannot be legislated, it must be lived, it must be chosen, it must be loved. That is what makes today's moment so powerful. Not its scale, but its sincerity. Not its publicity, but its profound purity. One gesture, one act, one sign, enough to stir hope where hope had been fading. There are those who will dismiss it as unimportant, others who will insist it changes nothing, merely a symbolic act without substance. But history has never been changed only by grand proclamations or sweeping reforms. It has also been changed, and perhaps more profoundly, by those who keep the flame alive when the world believes it is extinguished, by those who hold fast to truth and beauty, even in the shadows. So let us not underestimate the power of one sign, welcomed with a watchful heart. Let us remember that the Church has never been in the hands of politicians or strategists alone. She has always been, ultimately, in the hands of divine providence. And God writes his plans not just through councils and encyclicals, but through shepherds who listen to the whispers of tradition and through the faithful who remain steadfast in their love. This is not a call to triumph. It is a call to perseverance, to every family that continues to pass on the faith in the face of indifference, to every priest who reverently celebrates the liturgy, even when no one notices, to every young person seeking beauty in a world that trades reverence for relevance, to every soul who clings to the rosary, who kneels before the Eucharist, who believes that truth is not old, but eternal. This moment was for you, not as a reward, not as a promise of immediate, full reversal, but as a reminder, you are not alone, you are not forgotten. And perhaps, just perhaps, you were always part of what God was quietly preparing, a hidden seed of renewal for his Church. So do not give up, do not retreat, do not grow weary. Keep loving what the Church has always loved. Keep guarding what the saints once died to defend. Keep praying, not for a perfect Church in human terms, but for a holy one, a Church ever more conformed to Christ, her true bridegroom. Because in the end, the Church is not saved by human plans. She is saved by grace, and grace moves most powerfully through those who remain faithful, even in the darkest, most uncertain times.